Welcome to part four of my series entitled Renewing the Contract. Today I'm going to talk about a few things that involve, um, you know, just a few of the superficial things that are interesting to me, that make me, um, want to see maybe what the future is. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't. But ultimately, I'm, what I should be looking for with regards to the future of my life, and then some of the um, concerns that I have with regard to whether or not that's worth renewing the contract. So, um, as I've mentioned before, I don't have a lot of prospects in my life right now. I'm kind of, um, struggling financially. I don't have formal education of any sort of real sense. Uh, and there's a lot of uh, difficulty in determining that my overall outlook on life is actually going to be a hell of a lot better, um, just because it's going to continue to go on. And I know, obviously, what some of those difficulties are, and the like. But there's not really a lot of opportunity there. So I think one of the things I'd like to talk about is what may just be a happy occurrence for me, whether or not my own particular situation occurs. Uh, so you know, there are things outside of our own control that can make us happy. Um, if you're into a popular book series and it turns out the way you want it to, that's something outside of yourself that you know that can make you happy, and that is something to look forward to. Uh, if things aren't going well, so you know, just as a semi-recent popular example, um, you know, if you were a fan of the Harry Potter books or movies, if you didn't read the books beforehand, um, you would want to see how that turned out, good or bad. But you would want to see it how it turned out, hopefully, in hoping that it turned out well. Same goes for films or TV shows or anything like that. You watch them, perhaps knowing in some cases that things aren't going to turn out well, but you hope that they're going to turn out better than they could. You watch for certain markers that keep you compelled over the course of book series or a series of movies, or television show or what have you. Similarly, you know, you if you're a sports fan, you root for your certain sports team because you hope that they're going to either do as better than last year, or if they already won a championship, there's something to look forward to in the future. Maybe they can repeat. Maybe that enjoyment that you got can be repeated. I've lived my entire life as a sports fan without a championship. I root for primarily the Bills and the Sabres. I'm a Buffalo sports fan. That hasn't worked out well in my lifetime. We're 0 for 5 in championship level appearances. And I don't think that even begins to describe necessarily how some of the heartbreaks that have been suffered in other levels of those sports have happened. Now, it's not to say that I don't know what a championship city is like. I definitely know. I lived in Philadelphia in 2008. It was the first time that Philadelphia had won a championship in 25 years. And this is a pretty, invested sports city. Not necessarily always. Philadelphia deserves a bit more of a fair weather fan reputation than they actually have. That being said, people have lived with the Phillies for their entire lives in Philadelphia, even if they haven't always rooted for them, because the Phillies were generally terrible, and that was the best way to go. But it was a big release for a lot of people to have that team win a championship the way they did. Homegrown guys, doing well. And it was a big release, and it was a very cool thing to be around. I didn't have the best opinion of Philadelphia sports fans. By and large, I still don't. They are what they are. They're not fair weather in the sense that, if there's a festival going on, they're not going to show up to the game or anything like that. It's more whoever happens to be winning is who the Philadelphia sports fan claims to have been a diehard fan of for their entire lives. No, I never cared about the Sixers. They don't matter to me. I was more into the Eagles until the Eagles are doing badly and the Phillies are doing well, and then I've always been a baseball fan primarily, and then the Flyers make the Stanley Cup final against Chicago, and I've always been hockey is my number one sport. So, of cities that have all four major sports teams, they only have four. It's not like New York. It's not like LA where they, have multiple teams in a particular sport to be able to jump back and forth between. There's one team for each sport in Philly. Chances are one of them is doing well enough that the average fan can pretend to have ignored the other three. But winning is a amazing palliative. It soothes. There have been times, I'm sure, where every Philadelphia sports fan has rooted for the Phillies, when they have been relatively competitive, and have seen time and again crushing defeats, and you know, even if you do switch back and forth between which sport you actually pretend to love, the fact is, even whatever team was the best in Philadelphia for 25 years, I mean, that's a long time. Whatever team was the best didn't win a championship. So that meant that whatever team was the best, their seasons ended in heartbreak for a quarter of a century. And then these Phillies, they won the division in 07. They won the World Series in 08. Largely homegrown, lovable players: Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins, Cole Hamels, etc., etc. And these guys were really likable people. They had been around forever. You know, Pat Burrell, I think, was there when they won the title. I mean, these guys had been around Philadelphia for all that time, and you know, went on this run and won a World Series, and it was their first championship in the city in a quarter of a century. It was only the second championship in Phillies history in over 100 years. So it was a big deal, and it deserved to be a big deal. So, and I was living in that city at the time, and you know, these are not necessarily all even admitted baseball fans. These are a lot of basketball fans, a lot of hockey fans. You know, Eagles fans sort of cross all borders. And even people who weren't necessarily Phillies fans beforehand, they could tell that in that area there was a weight that was lifted. Everybody was walking with an extra bounce in their step just because that team, whether you were a baseball fan or not, that was your city, that was your area, and they won a major championship, and it was a long time coming. So I, as a Bills fan who suffered through the 4 Super Bowl losses and the Music City forward pass and everything else, and a Sabres fan who, you know, lived with no goal and no goal 2 and everything else, and the two teams that we had right after the lockout that, you know, just fell short of making the Stanley Cup final. Certainly, I am capable of seeing that, you know, what could happen to the city. And I don't live in Buffalo, but I'm close enough. Most of the people in the area are Buffalo sports fans. I could see what winning could do for the area, the city, and the people in it. And they would love this. I mean, and they deserve to love this. This is not, you know, I mean, it's a tortured fan base. I mean, the only championships that the you know, Buffalo area had won were AFL championships in 64 and 65. And there are some people that remember those and they treasure those because that's all they have. And I know what that would do for me. I mean, the first Super Bowl that I was allowed to stay up and watch, I was 7 years old, was Super Bowl 25 because I was a Bills fan, and my dad was a Bills fan, and my mom was not, but she was, of course, rooting for the Bills because she wasn't a Giants fan. And, I mean, it was, I mean, you know, I had followed the Bills since I was 3 years old. I was 7. So it's not like it had been in my entire lifetime, but I knew, even looking back now, I knew how good those teams were. I knew they deserved to have a chance to win, and it's the closest Super Bowl in history. I mean, it came down to one kick, and it wasn't a win or overtime like the first two Patriots Super Bowl wins. This is a win or a loss by 1 point or possibly two. So either way, it would have been the closest result in Super Bowl history to this day. And we're almost 25 years past Super Bowl 25. And I was 7 years old. I cried myself to sleep that night. I didn't blame Norwood or anything. It was just that you knew that kickers missed kicks from that distance. But I cried myself to sleep. And I didn't cry myself to sleep the next 3 years when the Bills also lost Super Bowls because they weren't that close of a game. Although as an 8-year-old, I tried to talk my way through and rationalize Super Bowl 26. Oh, if Reed hadn't taken his helmet off, they'd scored a touchdown there instead, and then, everything had gone right since, and blah, 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 and then we could have possibly won. And then the next year I was 9, and that was just, well, nobody played well, and then Kelly got hurt, and that was it. And then Super Bowl 10, or, when I was 10, Super Bowl 28, I'm thinking, well, all right, I'm 10 years old. The last 4 years, the Bills had made every Super Bowl. I'm not even that affected. They'll keep going back, and they're going to win one. All right, we'll see in Super Bowl 29. If we don't win that, we'll see in Super Bowl 30. And that's what I knew. I knew, I obviously, knew it was possible that they weren't going to get back, but, they'd done something that no other team had done, which has gone to 4 straight Super Bowls. They seem to be the class of the AFC every year. And even if they weren't, they dominated in playoff time. So, I grew up on the Bills losing 4 Super Bowls. They've been back since. On some level, I consider that my fault. I took it for granted that they would just be back all the time, and I took it for granted because they had gone to 4 straight, and I was 10 years old and didn't know any better. But, that's the nature of the game. And on some level, I blame myself for that. So, 5 years later, the Sabres put together this team of scrappy individuals. Nobody really a superstar, other than Dominic Hasek, the goalie, who's the focal point of any hockey team. Their best scorer was Miroslav Shatan, who wouldn't be the best scorer in any other team in the NHL. The captain was Michael Pekka, who was a valuable player and could be a valuable player to any team in the NHL, but would not have been a focal point like he was with the Sabres. And they put together this run through the playoffs where they're just dominating. Their power play scored in every single game, and I remember that. That is not me looking this up beforehand. That is me remembering that. Their power play had at least 1 goal in every game leading up to the Stanley Cup final, and they scored in their first game, and they won that first game against Dallas. And they didn't score the rest of the time. And they, went into overtime in a game down 3-2 in the series. Dallas scores. The season's over, and they score on an illegal goal that the referees missed, and subsequently the NHL retroactively changed the rule to state that Brett Hull scored legally. Brett Hull then, by the way, after his playing career was over, he became an analyst for, Versus, whoever the hell it was, and was the most anti-Sabres fucker on television. And I was so glad when he became the GM of the Dallas Stars and signed Sean Avery and did all this shit and essentially, drove their franchise into the ground and proved that he's an inept moron that, short of inheriting his dad's racist genes, inherited every other moron gene that his father had. Yes, he didn't show the racism that his father did. He just showed all the stupidity. And I'm glad that that's on display for everybody, and it's just unfortunate that he was actually such a talented player that people largely are going to overlook that. But no, I'm not bitter. So, the Sabres go there. They play in 3 straight Eastern Conference Finals. They have the Now Do You Believe team in 05-06 right after the lockout. And then the best team in the league, and they won the President's Cup the year after that, and just nothing happened. They made the Eastern Conference Finals those 2 years and lost to a terrible Carolina team that ended up winning the Stanley Cup, and that's a disaster for the NHL. And a pretty poor Ottawa team that got railed by Anaheim in the Stanley Cup final. Again, a disaster for the NHL, really, having these southern, non-traditional fan-based teams winning Stanley Cups, and then it making absolutely no difference to those fan bases. And it's not like you're getting number 1 draft picks out of Southern California or out of Raleigh, Durham. But the point I'm trying to make here is that I would really like, sometime in my life, to see a Bills Super Bowl win or a Sabres Stanley Cup win, preferably both. Or have the same owner, who I like. I would like to see this in my lifetime. It's something that keeps me coming back every year. I mean, the NHL season runs through April. The regular season does. If you make the playoffs, it can run up through June. From October every year. The football season runs from August for preseason, September for the regular season, all the way up through February. So there's really not a lot of downtime where I'm maybe not rooting for one of my 2 major teams. And yes, I mean, if the Bills go 0-6, 0-7, then yeah, I know they're not going to win that season by the end of October. Similarly, if the Sabres are last in the conference by the end of November, chances are they're not winning the Stanley Cup that year. So, yes, I mean, it can be ended very quickly. So I can be full of optimism in the middle of August, and by the end of November, that's the end of it. But I always have something to look forward to. It's what Bill Simmons calls the illusion of hope. So if your team is bad, they get to draft high, and then they get you excited about the players that they draft. And, so I'm excited about Sammy Watkins. Bills beat Detroit today, and Watkins was just wide open all the time. And everybody who said they shouldn't have traded for him and they traded too much can suck it, because he's that fucking good. Oh my God, is he just wide open all the time. So, I have this illusion of hope. And I figure if I just, go about my life, I turn things around, I live long enough. Let's say I live to the, expected average age of 80. I'm 30 now. That's 50 more seasons with the Bills. And Sabres. It's a pretty reasonable thing to believe that I could possibly see one of those two teams win a championship and just be happier than you could possibly believe, just like everybody else who's a fan of those two teams. We would be ecstatic. We would deserve to be. Even if, however, the Bills were considered like, say, the Broncos or one of the other teams in the AFC that's considered a Super Bowl favorite this year. And let's say, for example, that the Sabres were, Stanley Cup contenders. Maybe not favorites, but they were in the mix. They were one of the top 5 or 6, 7 teams. In the mix, according to people's opinions, according to, standard logic. Both of these teams are in the mix to win titles this year or in the next 3 or 4 years. Here's the question that comes up when I'm deciding whether or not I want to renew my contract. Are those possibilities, even if they're good possibilities, and I'm definitely not saying that they are this year or even in the foreseeable future, but let's say you're a San Diego Chargers fan. You haven't seen a title in San Diego. Do you think that the possibility of having a team that you've rooted for your entire life, you've invested more emotion into their success than you've invested in your own relationships having success, that this is something that would make a lot of people that you've never met in your entire life feel like your brothers and your sisters? Is that worth staying alive for? Are the accomplishments of a small group of other people whose only attachment to you is the name of the city that is stamped on their company logo, their company letterhead, is that enough to stay alive for? Is even the possibility of it enough to stay alive for? Because you don't know. Nobody knows what's going to happen. So it's a possibility. It can even be a good possibility. It doesn't have to be like a Bills or Sabres fan where it's not really a great possibility anytime soon. You could be a Broncos fan that's 10 years old and never seen the team before. It's a pretty good possibility this season that you're going to do well, that you have a chance at winning a Super Bowl. Is that enough to stay alive for? I really don't think so. I don't think that the accomplishments of a group of other people, much as I want to see them succeed, seeing them succeed and succeeding myself are two different things. If I succeed myself, if I become the head coach of the Buffalo Bills, and even if we go 6-10, that's worth seeing through because I have an emotional investment in that success. But I'm just a fan. I don't matter. Even if I matter to the players and the coaches as the fans. I'm just a crowd. I'm just a herd. I personally don't matter to them, and I shouldn't. Um, and they matter to me. But I don't think, realistically, that they matter to me enough to stay alive. That seems a little absurd. I mean, putting my life and what I decide to do with it, whether I decide to renew my contract or not, in the hands of other people. If my life was that crappy 6 years ago, and I was a Harry Potter fan, should I really objectively decide to stay alive just to see whether Harry lives or dies at the end of the last book? I don't think so. I don't think so. It's entertainment. It's something that's going to go on without me. Yes, I'd like my curiosity satisfied. But ultimately, my curiosity isn't really going to bother me that much if I decide to cancel my contract. So, this is something that I've had love for my entire life. The Bills first, the Sabres second, just because that's the order that I discovered those sports in. I love them. I want them to win. I want to see them win. I want to be there at the parade. I want to be there at the game when they win. I want to be outside, and I want to be getting picked up by a random fan who I have nothing in common with other than we root for the same team. I want that more than anything else, more than most anything else. But I don't know as it's worth staying alive for. I don't know as it's worth fighting to improve my life for. And that's something that I'm going to have to decide on. Among other reasons to renew the contract, is the possibility of somebody else's achievements validating my happiness sometime in my life. Is that worth living that life for? My gut reaction is no, but it is something that we are going to continue to explore as we continue the series, renewing the contract. For now, so long. Thanks for watching.